know you're always working.
Yeah, what else is there to do but work?
I feel you. Well, let's try to have some fun. I'm so thrilled to just hang out with you. So let's relax and just have fun with it. I'm just I know you are interviewed a lot, and we're not Mixed Mag or Red Bull or any of those labs, but we love our little vintage house show. And we've been doing it for like 6 years now.
Oh,
It's hard to
fabulous.
believe. Yeah, 6 years. I think I talked to Lauren. I was like, how many guests have we seen? We've talked to like 200 people. And so
Oh, wow.
we got a lot of stories, girl. We got a lot of
Wow.
stories. I mean,
Well,
we've
I'm
got,
very honored. It doesn't matter that you're not, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't you. So
well, okay, so y'all heard that. So don't even, you need to call
I
her
don't
publicist.
do
Okay.
interviews, unless it was you, but yeah,
Don't
I'm
be
glad.
asking me any questions. Okay. She's only doing it for me. Thank you. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. So, well, welcome. Welcome to the
Thank
Vintage
you.
House Show. We have had, some times together in the 80s. And I want people to know who you are. And I'm going to, talk a lot about who you are. And the people have already heard that in the intro. But I want to hear it from you. You're from Chicago. You are an international success. You have put Chicago on the map in ways none of my friends have done. So that's why we're all so proud of you and love you and can brag about you because you are ours. You are ours. I don't care what anybody says. You are ours. You belong
Well,
to
I
us.
mean, yeah, I
She's
mean,
like, kinda.
no, it's true. I mean, I always, you know, it was life changing for me. I mean, I was such a kid at that time, and I was, just a little backstory. And I've been talking a lot about this, about my
Mhm,
roots of how I came into this music. But um, it was, my first musical education was from my parents. My
mhm.
parents had a vast record collection and they liked to party, child. I grew up on 93rd in Kingston. And
Wow.
I always tell people I'm from the hood. Like, I know I make it look chic and sophisticated and all of that. And the bitch is black as fucking from the hood.
Ooh,
So, Southside, 93rd in Kingston,
I
Cottage
love
Grove Bus, all of that,
Southside.
Evergreen Plaza and all of that. Um,
That's
I
great.
just really feel that I was really born at a very special time,
Mhm.
and I don't know, I could have been born at any moment in history, and I just happened to be born at the beginning of house music culture. And I was very, very, very fortunate, and I met you through your brother Carl.
Mhm.
But as most, my life growing up in the South Side wasn't easy.
No.
I was to use the language now, I mean, being a trans person, but back then you were just bullied a lot for being different.
Mhm.
And music was my salvation. Music was what sort of gave me comfort when the world was not having me, especially in the
Right.
Black and Latin neighborhood. So I was really lucky because, like a lot of people don't remember, a lot of early house music parties were in Catholic high school auditoriums.
Of
And
course.
so, I went to Catholic schools because that's what Black people did back then. Would get you a better education, they put you in a Catholic school. And so I went to St. Peter and Paul as a kid, and then when I went to high school, I went to Hales Franciscan, which many people know is an all boys school. Um, I can talk about that now comfortably because I'm very secure with who I am. But in my previous
That's good.
life, that's where I went. And so, house music was such a big part of that. And, kids would bring tapes to school where someone would heard at the warehouse or in the plant. So it's just sort of, this was my education. It was really from the ground up. It wasn't like I experienced it in a club. I experienced house music taking the train. If kids were dressed a certain way, you knew they were into house music, or like hearing it on the back of the bus going home from school. People had mixed tapes, and people would bring tapes to school and play what someone had bootlegged at the club. So for me, it was really like I was thrust into this music and culture just from by being who I was. So that's my beginning of that. And then I met your brother Carl, and then he introduced me to you. And then I used to do sleepovers at your house, and then used to come home high as hell. And like,
Now, just tell that story, right? Because you know
well,
what?
the story was I was in awe of you because you know I had never seen anyone like you before. Like the cat suits and the punk out hair, and what people don't realize is Chicago is such a musical city that there was all this mix of sounds going around, and you had the new wave scene and the punk scene, and you
Right.
know, but what was so funny to me, the same thing was happening in New York, but in a different way.
Yeah.
But that's, so you either know if people were house, if they were dressed like they were about to, because jacking used to be called punking out.
That's
And you
right.
either like had safety pins and your mohawks, or you were wearing things from like Gianfranco Ferré or Versace. So I always tell
Absolutely.
people my education in fashion and music came from Southside Chicago.
I love it. Let's talk about some of those folks. So you mentioned Carl. There was and Carl's my little brother who absorbed everything. You know, he's a
Yeah.
musical person and he's a pianist and he's a musician and he was Honey's friend, which is how I met Honey. It's great.
Yeah.
And John, remember John Jordan?
There was John Jordan, who I also met through Carl, the
Yeah,
shadiest queen on the planet.
she.
Evil and shady, but funny.
Yes.
Funny. And actually, you know, I had this illusion about being a model when I was a kid. I mean, I'm really talking like 12, 11, 12, 13 years old. I was so mature for my age. I can't think now if you're like a young Black kid, the freedom that we have, it's mind blowing because I went everywhere on my own.
Yeah.
But I developed early, as they say. So, um, yeah, I met John, and John introduced me to down Rush Street, and when they had
That's right.
Parachute and Oak Street,
Yes.
and
Parachute.
Parachute and Oak Street, and what was that other, um, Ultimo, and all of these sorts of things. Like, it's so funny because like people think it's also separate. Like even Frankie Knuckles and Larry Levan wanted to go to fashion school, so
Hmm.
fashion was always a part of this culture. It was never separate. You know, the Izod parties and the
Absolutely.
Momo parties, and you know, it was all about people, marginalized people, creating art and beauty from creating safe spaces for
Yeah.
themselves. Because being queer or different back in this, you got your ass kicked. So
That's right.
um, it was real. Like it was really real. Like I learned survival skills on the streets of Chicago and in the streets of New York when I transitioned.
Right.
But like you had to have a tough skin back then because it was like it was really real. So I had to find my tribe, and I found my tribe through this culture. That's why I champion it so much, because house music culture wasn't just about entertainment the way it's been co-opted and colonized and corporatized as it is
Right.
today, but it was really a community of people, and especially people of color and queer people of color, coming to celebrate and love and find love and dress up, and it was art. It was an artistic movement for me. So that's why
Right.
it's so important for me to continue this conversation the way that I do.
I appreciate that. And you know, one thing you're mentioning, and I want to talk about your clothing line in a minute, but the fashion was a big piece of it. And it's something we don't talk about a lot.
Yes.
But it was important, you know, and I was surrounded. The reason I was punked out in cat suits and zebra skins and wild hair was because I had gay men who were doing that for me,
Yeah.
who were teaching me, you know, like
Right.
make a statement when, if you're going to DJ or if you're just going out, you know, make a statement. It's
Yeah.
important. It's part of who you are. It's how you get your confidence.
Yeah.
And we made clothes. They made clothes for me. I couldn't sew a button,
Right.
but it was a big piece of it. And you would get dressed up to go to the warehouse.
You would dress up to go out and sweat it off. I mean, it wasn't, I always say what I really appreciate about that time, fashion wasn't about aspiration, it was inspiration.
That's
You
true.
know, and so that's why I've always approached fashion. I mean, like for me, like it's so funny working with these big brands now, because I said,
Mhm.
you guys don't know that most of my fashion education didn't come from a school. I wasn't born into a wealthy family. You know, we didn't have the means. You know, like if I went to Marshall Fields, I would literally just walk around in circles on Marshall Fields and look at clothes I could never
Yeah.
afford. But it was my education. I got to see things up close. I got to see Gaultier up close. I got to see
Mhm.
Westwood up close. I got to see all of these things up close, Willie Wear up close, Calvin Klein up close.
Yes.
And so even though I couldn't, you know, my education was really from, you know, the streets of Chicago and
Mhm.
house music culture in
Yeah.
so many ways. And also how the music was presented. And you know, I always say, you know, people think I'm being really lofty when I say this, but I say, you know, these were jazz, they were doing jazz, but with just pre-recorded music,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know?
I can feel that. I feel that.
Because
I,
it was so freeform. You knew your records, but the way you put them together and the moment and how and the timing and when and where, and you know, that's the same as jazz for me. So, but yeah, fashion, and I couldn't afford shit, and you know, I was too scared to steal shit because I knew my mother would kick my ass if I.
ooh, the
So I just
boosting was real though. The boosting was real.
the
There was
boosting was real. I mean,
Honey.
I remember just like to say how real it was. I remember going to Evergreen Plaza and going to the Lark and just like
The
lusting
lark.
after the Lark and Chess King and just lusting after Sergio Valente jeans and lusting after like I wanted a cowboy shirt and lusting
Yeah,
after like jellies and lusting after like all this stuff that I used to see such incredible
yeah.
people. And then sort of, I used to be so envious that I didn't have like when you had good hair, because I
Mm.
didn't have good hair. So when the kids with good hair did like mohawks, and because
Hmm.
I remember Vince Clark's hairdo was the big hairdo, like that one, like it was just so many things that I couldn't do. So I just stuck to Grace Jones because
Oh,
that was,
Grace, Grace was your jam.
Grace was
When
my
I think
jam. That
about
was my
Grace
great
Jam,
equalizer.
I think about you. When I think about Grace Jones, you are
Yeah.
like one and the
That, you
same.
know why? Because that was the only thing my nappy hair could do was that flat
Oh,
top.
come on, she
I
was so.
couldn't do what the mixed race kids were doing. They could have all the fierce punk out hairdos, but
Oh Lord.
like you remember when everyone used to shave their hair and just have that little curly
Uh-huh,
bit in the front?
I do.
I didn't have that kind of hair, child, so I had to do flat tops.
It's all good hair. It's all
It's
good.
all good hair, but I'm just saying, I had to resort to other looks in order to get my point across. And
But
shop at the thrift store. That was a big thing.
um,
Like when my parents moved me to Hazel Crest from the South Side, there was a Salvation Army, and like I was like a teenager, I had no money, but if I would get $10, you could put a look together for $10.
that's right. The thrift stores were the bomb.
That
Well,
was it.
I would Rob Parks, who was a mutual friend of ours,
Yeah,
rest in peace. That's what we used to do. We would
yeah,
go to thrift stores and make our look.
and make our look. And the thing about being punk out, all you needed was safety pins. So all you needed was some white socks, some penny loafers, some jeans rolled up, an oversized blazer that you could get for 50 cents.
Yes,
Put some go to wax tracks, get some badges, put it on there. You had a look.
that's true. Little sky figures.
Yeah, you had a look.
I remember that. So
Yeah.
you were I just have so many memories. We could spend all day doing that, and I love it. I think about when I lived downtown and
On Princess Row.
right on Printers Row, and you had so much energy. And I had this girlfriend. Her name was Debbie, and when you came by, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much energy. And I thought I had a lot of energy. I think you were like 15. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I was like, I hope we're not being a bad influence. I
You were in a
really,
good way. I mean, I always say I was introduced to a lot of things, but I think the biggest thing for me that was life changing was John Waters' Female Trouble.
oh my
Mean,
gosh.
and because, Carl knew that movie from backwards to forwards, and it was so funny the way he would emulate everyone. And so that was my education. And that's also, Imports used to be down the street, and that's where I
Right,
met my best friend for life, Derek Carter. So all of these
right.
things were converging in my adolescent, in my formative years. That's
Yeah,
probably, I still have that same energy. Um,
I know. I see it.
I,
I
you know,
love
that,
it.
that's, it's just always, my mom just makes fun of me all the time, but like, cause I'm home now visiting and it's like, I can't sit still for 5 minutes. She's like, you've always had that energy. And I was like, well, I just came this way.
Well, we have you here in Chicago, so blessings. I know it was a happy accident for us
It was a happy
that,
accident.
that you're here, and we for a couple weeks. I think you're leaving soon, but I'll keep your business your business.
Yeah.
But while you're here, you got to go to some of your old haunts.
Yeah.
What's changed for you? Like, what do you notice that is different, good or bad?
Ooh, Chicago has gotten a facelift, Hans. It looks all nice and clean, and it's more modern.
Yeah,
But every time I come here, my first port is gramophone records.
of course.
It's still one of the best indie record stores in the world, and one of the few remaining ones in the world.
Yeah,
And I get stuff there that I don't ever get anywhere else. But it's nice that they have modern conveniences and things like delivery and like, really good food. I mean, back then the food was okay, but Chicago's one of the best culinary
amen,
cities in the world. And
amen.
so, coming back here, it's always, no matter where I am in the world, it's always, New York is my other home, but this is
Yes.
really, really, really home for me.
That's good. You met, so Derek Carter, I want to spend a couple minutes talking about Derek, who I'd love to have on the show, by the way, Derek, if you're watching. Um, you talk about him being your mentor, and I
Mhm,
know he was down the street when we were in Printers Row, and I kind of remember sort of when that bridge happened, but
mhm.
how did that come to be, and what does it mean to have Derek Carter as a mentor?
Well, how that came to be was from my sister Sonia had a girl that lived down the street from us on Kingston, and her name was
Hmm.
Gretchen. And Gretchen had a boyfriend named Francisco. Francisco used to drop acid all the time, and he's like, "You need." So Gretchen said to my sister, "Honey needs to meet Francisco because I know Honey likes the music. He likes the music that they both like." So it
Yes.
was through Francisco that I went to go meet Derek at Imports, and we just got on like a house on fire. It
Yeah.
was just like um, Derek wasn't out at the time. I was obviously, honey, you could see me coming from an airplane. You know, I was so flamboyant and
Oh,
so
you were great.
me. I was just, yeah, but at that time it wasn't so accepting. I just, and we just met and we became really great friends. And I knew Derek before he was the legend that he is now. I just knew him
Yes.
as we used to talk on the phone when he lived at his mama's house, sharing bunk beds with his brother. I mean, we go back that far. I think we've known each other since we were like 17. We've been, well, yeah, since teenagers we've
Yeah,
known each
yeah.
other. And so I used to, as we got older and started partying, he used to live in a place called Red Nail, which is 120 North Green Street, which is now right across the street from Soho House.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
which I stayed at recently, which was really funny because it's like, that used to be across the street from like, it used to be a donut place. And we used to go get, and I was like, oh my God, this is too hilarious.
Yeah.
So I got to see someone really present music in a way that was radical. I mean, the way he would put music together and not just house music, but, he was so forward thinking and using soundtrack. I mean, he really took it one step further than what Ron did, with
Mm-hmm.
Ron using the sound effects and the trains and all of these sorts of things. He
Mm-hmm.
incorporated show tunes. I remember him playing, I Don't Want to Be Alone Tonight from Spike Lee's School Days over Acid House Records.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, I never saw music presented in that way. And we had many conversations about that. And he said, there was so much talent in Chicago that you had to push the envelope to even get
That's true.
noticed.
That's true.
And so I was lucky enough to be in the booth many a nights and just watch him play records. And so um, I always thought that was normal. I mean, growing up in Chicago, just seeing so many talented people, that was just beating the box was like, that was expected. Like if you didn't beat the box, you were like, people didn't give you the time of day. Like, oh,
That's
you ain't
right.
a DJ, you ain't shit. Chicago keeps it 100. Like you ain't shit. And
That's
then,
right. We're kind of
like if
like
you don't,
Showtime at the Apollo.
you can't, like if you gonna come beat the box, like what's good? So he was a mentor, and for me, I have a word now for my art, and it's experiential.
Mm.
I got to experience greatness, and now I'm just using that life experience to keep expressing the music the way that I do. Everything that I play, I have two mentors with Danny Tenaglia and Derek Carter, but
Mhm.
Derek Carter for me was the one that really sort of expanded how the roots of Chicago and how to play and layering records and sound effects and accenting certain parts of the
Yes.
record and using and remixing pop records and all of this is Chicago shit like on any given Saturday night. It's radical for the rest of the world, but for like what I'm doing now, I always say when I travel, it's like everything that I'm doing is not mine.
Right. Oh, wow. That's sweet.
It's
That's
not
sweet.
mine. I've just taken what I've experienced and made it my own.
You have.
But the information is not mine. It's Ron, it's Frankie, it's Derek, it's
Yeah.
it's so many, it's a collage of so many great artists.
Speaking of Frankie, I was watching something you said some time ago when you said a statement that I thought was really interesting, and it was something like that he was the last black gay.
The last gay black DJ that we had.
Exactly.
Hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is that he really um, represented a time
Mm-hmm.
that is no longer here.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like Black people have abandoned house music in a way. A certain
Mm.
generation still holds on to it, but majority of the people around the world that listen to this music and celebrate this music, there aren't Black people. And I think, when you think about the information that he had in New York in the 70s and DJing in the Continental Baths or being around in the Continental Baths or being in Nicky Siano's gallery, being in these really formative clubbing cultures and experiences that have set the template to what's happening now. And having that Black gay expression,
Yes.
um, you know, I don't feel like, I think AIDS has really, I always love what Fran Lebowitz said, AIDS not only took the people that created the art, but it also took people that listened and celebrated the art. And so,
Absolutely.
for me, AIDS is really just killed culture besides gentrification.
Yeah.
Um, but Frankie for me was a bridge to that information, that language, that experience, that musicality, the way you present. I used to always call him the Black Science Orchestra. Um,
I
I had
love
two
it.
names for Frankie: Francine Fishpaw from female,
I
Francine,
love it. See,
and because everything
y'all
was
gotta
always
watch.
John Waters,
All
and
right,
then
you know what? People have to watch Female Trouble after they see this.
yeah,
So you'll get all these references after that.
yeah,
And you get
Francine.
you some black
No,
chocolate.
what? Yeah, so Frankie to me was just that carried that information pre-AIDS,
Yes.
during AIDS, because people fail to realize that house music and AIDS happened at the same time,
Yes.
81, 82, 83. And this was the beginning of that. So, you had this virus that was killing so many people that they didn't know what they were being killed about. And so that was the birth of activism. And then you had people trying to come to grips with finally get a little bit of freedom to express yourself sexually. And here comes this disease that just tears 20 years of work post World War II down.
Right.
So for me, when I say he was the last Black gay DJ, he was the last time that there was so much activism and growth that was happening in the gay community that was just wiped out with AIDS.
So
And we don't have any now. Derek Carter for me is the last out Black gay DJ that we
so have
have
you.
in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm the only trans person of color at the level that I'm at in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
So, for me, it's if and I keep saying, if I don't play this way or talk this way or say this way, it's gonna be gone. And the same with Derek. Once Derek leaves, it's gonna be gone.
Right.
Like, who else is gonna pass that information?
Well, I think there are people out there. I honestly, I feel like the closet has come back in vogue, because
Yeah.
I know some black gay DJs who just are not as out as they need to be, and
Yeah.
that comes at a cost.
Yeah, it comes at cost. And I even remember too, when, we're speaking of our mutual friend Rob,
Mhm.
when he, I remember that time when it was all about being, thug.
Yeah,
When the thug came in
that's right.
vogue, and it was all about that. And
She
it
did
was
not
just,
do Thug very well. Come
she
on.
could not, she tried. I'm like,
She did not.
it is not working for you, honey.
Uh-uh.
But I remember specifically when there started to be, and I knew it was because of AIDS that there
Yes.
was this identity backlash against everything that had gone before. And this was happening in white gay culture, the whole muscle culture. They didn't want to
Right.
look sick and they didn't want to look weak. So it went the opposite way for Black gay men. It was like thug hard. I'm not spreading this disease. People forget that these things affect the music and the
Mhm.
conversations
Mhm.
and a lot of that. And so that's what I mean by the last gay Black DJ.
I feel you. And you said that black people abandon house music.
Yeah,
Some people say white people stole it. Which one is it?
both are true.
How so?
Well, they certainly, I don't want to offend any Black people of color, but we're just not taught business.
Okay, I feel you.
We're not taught how to um, do business, especially when it comes to music. I mean, I'm just learning now how to buy a house. Like, this isn't information. I can only speak from my experience. My growing up, my parents like get a good job with benefits.
Hmm.
That was the goal if you were, but I understand coming
Right.
from post World War II and the racism of the 60s and the 70s and how hard it was for Black people and just
Mhm.
not having access to how to be abundant.
Right.
Um, so I think, when hip hop came along and that whole, I think it was a generational change. And then
Hmm.
house music started to become something that white people listen to. So I think not
Hmm.
only was it colonized, but it also became so distant to Black people that they didn't even think it came from Black culture anymore. So I think it was not just one or the other, but both.
That's crazy. It's kind of similar. We don't talk about this either, but blues went through a similar
Yeah,
trajectory,
yeah,
where if you go to listen to blues, you're often listening to all white blues artists.
yeah.
How the hell did that happen?
How did that happen? And also, and this is no disrespect to anyone, but and as much as I cherish the Paradise Garage and the warehouse and the power plant,
Hmm.
I want to hear what new kids are doing, and
Me
I
too.
want to hear what new kids are saying, and I want to hear their interpretation of that music. These places are closed, these DJs are dead, that time is gone.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, I don't live in the past in a nostalgic way. I live in it in a way from I take creatively from that and how
Hmm.
can I move that forward to today? How can I expand upon this language that has gone before me? How can I make disco sound new and fresh? How
Yes.
can I make a new disco record? Why does it have to be something that Salso did? Why does it have to be something that West did? I can't improve upon something that was 100% perfect the first time and
Hmm.
its imperfection. I
Hmm.
can't do that. I can't, no one, there's nowhere in the world that someone can make a record like Go Bang Now.
No,
They're
no,
just, you know, or Billy Who, or Thousand Finger Man. You
no.
know, you're talking pre-digital, you're talking musicians, you're talking culture and singers and having, um, it got abandoned for like, Banji, Beyonce and hip hop and that's popular culture for Black people. House music has always been alive and well in Europe, and they
Why is
embraced it.
that? I don't get it.
Well, I don't want to read people, but colonizers,
Yeah.
who colonized America, who colonized this country,
Hmm.
but you can't be mad at someone for taking something and
Right.
running with it. And so it went to the UK. They saw this, they celebrated it. They were the first ones to bring over a lot of Black artists who had never left Chicago.
Right.
A lot of this was a lot of, so it's multi-layered.
Hmm.
It's not one stole and one abandoned. It's just the evolution of what happened in the music and the culture.
So I feel you. And what do we do about that? And I know what you're doing about it. And I think everyone applauds you and when we lift you up and like want to say yes, that is the path. What are other people's paths? Like, and everyone's got to figure that out for themselves. But what do we
Right.
see? What are we missing?
I just think visibility and exposure to those
Yeah.
stories, and that's what I try to do in my work, and like bringing people like you or doing things, and like Craig Loftus is still around.
Hmm.
I think it's exposing these people. Even like I posted about Mark Farina yesterday, and like a lot of people may not know how great of a DJ. There were so
Yeah.
many people. So I think as long as I have this platform and visibility, I'm going to try is put a spotlight on as many people. I talk a lot about. Everyone always talks about the power plant and the warehouse. No one talks about CODs. No one talks about cheats. No one
That's
talks
true.
about Windy City. No one talks about Bijou 1 and 2. No one talks about
We just
um,
about that.
no one talks about um, any of these places,
Hmm.
and Paradise. Um, there's
Yeah.
so many more stories. No one talks about Normandy's, the Latin gay club that we all went to. You know, there's so many things and stories that need to be told. And so for me, it's important to keep that going.
Yes.
And
And
not out of nostalgia, but like, no, yeah, Ron and Frankie were fucking fierce, but look at this person. Look at that place. Look
right.
at who was in here. This is not the whole story.
Yeah, you're not, you're right. And I know our executive producer Lauren is taking great notes. Those those are clubs we do need to talk about. We spend a lot of time, and there's no disrespect. I love all my warehouse memories and
Yeah, of
films.
course.
It made me who I am. But you're right. I was out every single night of the week, and it wasn't
Yeah,
always the warehouse or the
yeah.
power plant. It
Right,
was tons
exactly.
of stuff going on. So go ahead, honey.
No, no, no. I mean, my whole, like I said, meeting Derek Carter, that was the same
Mhm.
time around, with Prescription Records, with Ron and Shay, and Cash Records when Cashmere was doing it,
Right.
and so most of the part we didn't even go to clubs. Most of my clubbing experience was I was too young to get into clubs, so most of
That's
mine
right.
was like loft parties and
Hmm.
underground parties.
Hmm. Hanging out.
Sometimes people would make tapes and bring them to my apartment.
That's
I just gave Derek like a box of tapes that him and Mark just made for having little parties in my apartment.
that's so sweet. Yeah,
Yeah,
we spent a lot of time in Craig Loftus' basement when I was a teenager.
yeah.
That's how that all started.
I mean,
Yeah,
I used to have a fake ID to go to clubs because, well, you could
yeah,
get a fake ID on 63rd and Stone. Was it Cottage Grove? It was the 63rd Street Cottage Grove L stage stop.
yeah,
I remember getting a fake ID.
yeah. Like that really meant anything. Like they didn't know it was a fake ID.
They knew it was a fake ID, but if you were there,
It's like you made the effort, so we'll let you in.
You know, I mean, sometimes I didn't get, you know, where I got most shit was from the white gay clubs. They were the ones that didn't let me in.
Well, they didn't want black people in there.
Yeah, they didn't want black people. So all those clubs on Halstead, the video bars and Roscoe's and all that shit. I got thrown out once from a gay bar. And can you imagine being a teenager? And that's when voguing was starting to come around. And me and my friend Aaron, we were voguing and just having fun and carrying on. And a bouncer came over and said, "We don't want any degenerates in the club," and they threw us out. And that was when I realized white gay culture doesn't have my back either.
You got to have your own.
Yeah.
You wanted to leave Chicago, and you did. What made you leave to pursue other things?
I got fired from my job.
Okay.
I was I was always late because I was at the club. And I got fired from my job, and Derek was just starting to DJ a lot. Mark had moved to San Francisco, and I felt like I don't know. It was just a chance to do something that I didn't really see why I was staying in Chicago. Right. And I moved to Washington, D.C. I didn't even know I wanted to be a DJ. I was a dancer and a clubber back then. I just loved the music so much. I just always bought the records and just danced by myself in my bedroom until I was dizzy. And, I always bought records when I was with Carl. We always went record shopping. I just always bought records. I went to Loop Records, Wax Tracks. I just always bought records.
And you had...
and that's where I met... Huh?
I was about to say, and you kept them in pristine condition. I remember that. Who'd you meet?
So I moved to Washington, D.C. for a year, which was the worst year of my life.
I visited you while you were there. Remember when
Rob? Oh my God, it was so depressing.
You were not happy.
I was not happy because I didn't understand politics. I didn't understand classism. Because growing up in Chicago the way that I did, this is what I'm talking about. I grew up in a Black and Latin neighborhood. Then when I started partying, it was people that liked this music. It didn't matter the skin color or what part of town you lived in or who your family was. Or, I had friends of all colors and all sexual or, club kids, trans people. I just knew everyone. And it was just because we all loved this music. So when I moved to a city that was based on classism and politics, it was like a mind fuck for me because I didn't navigate my life from that perspective. But the one thing that it did allow me to do was to take the Greyhound bus up 4 hours, $40 every weekend. And that's how I met. And that was my slow transition to moving to New York. And I moved to New York with $300 in my pocket.
Wow.
And slept on my friend Gant Johnson's floor.
Oh Lord.
There's stories, honey. It's not all like as my mother says, you may see my glory, but you don't know my story.
Hey, listen, there is never an overnight sensation. Nothing's overnight.
No, mine took like 30 years, but
you were great. So you got to New York. When did you start? When did you get the bug to DJ? How did that happen?
I got the bug to DJ because music wasn't being presented in New York the way it was in Chicago. Like I go back to the conversation, Chicago was such a musical city and all sort of scenes bled into each other. And as a house music DJ, like I remember, it was so, what people don't realize, it wasn't 4/4 all night. I remember hearing, "Oh, Mickey, You're So Fine," that was a house record. Then Planet Claire was a house record. Gino Social Remember was a house record. Problems D'Amour was a house record, so my education wasn't limited by genres. It was limited. It was expressed in if it rocked the party and if it felt. And in New York, it was so separate. You went to the Sound Factory to hear Tribal House. You went to Shelter to hear soulful music. You went to this to hear that. Save the Robot to hear. And I just thought, why do I have to go to 5 different clubs to hear what I want to hear from one where I can? So I literally started out of necessity. Just playing. I had all the records. I said, I got all these fucking records. So I just started playing. And I was horrible at first. I learned so it was doubly hard for me. So when all these people now talk about how hard it is to be a DJ, try transitioning and also DJing at the same time. Try buying records and hormone therapy at the same time. Try having to find money for surgery and buying records and gear and a computer and turntables and needles and slip mats, and try that.
What don't kill you makes you stronger.
I did a lot of boosting in that time. I stole a lot of shit. I'm surprised I never got caught, but I'm not that innocent.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
No,
So
but it was I loved it so much that I wanted to be a part of the conversation, so I did what I had to do, but also trying to, you know, deal with your gender identity at the same time and your sexuality. It was, those, I don't really look back on those years fondly because it was hard. It was hard being misunderstood by gay culture, and it was hard being misunderstood by straight people. So you're like, you're really having to figure out and navigate the world as a human being when you don't belong anywhere.
it's hard to find your tribe.
It was, I mean, I found my tribe in the
Mhm,
girls in New York when I started, like most trans women, I did drag art for many years and I found my
mhm.
community in that way. And luckily, I had great taste in music. So instead of doing sex work, I was able to do bar gigs and
That's
just
right.
start DJing around the city. And so I would just make tapes and I just developed my skill set. I would listen to Derek tapes. I would hang out in the booth with Danny and just, I really learned in real time
Mhm.
how to not only be a DJ, but how to be an entertainer and an artist.
Yeah. You were in a movie back in the 90s, weren't
Yeah,
you?
who cares? Yeah, Wixstar.
The reason I'm asking is that I remember it, but I couldn't remember it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it made
But
a small impression for you, I see.
these new kids now that they don't, they're not a success with the first record or how come I was just like, y'all ain't got, you know, when especially when men say how hard it is, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Anyway,
Yeah,
next.
anyway, like y'all, yeah, next.
So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead, but we can take it as slow as you want. And there's my dog. Cue the dog. Um, you went, you did a massive leap into an international scene, and that took you touring, that took you to many different places. What was the linchpin that made that happen? And I know some of it was about your producing. So if you want to talk about that, that'd be great.
Um, the funny thing is, I thought doing one thing would lead to that thing, but it was, Derek always said, just keep working. I think it was just a body of work. It wasn't one specific thing. It was, um, I was lucky enough to, when I moved to New York and like I said, started doing drag art gave me a lot of access to promoters. And New York at that time, there were a lot of people visiting from France and Germany. And so, I would put my thing back then was to perform, DJ, and then do a show. So that was my gimmick. I would go out and lip sync to the house records that I was playing and then go back and play. That was my, no one was sort of doing that at the time.
That's
So,
right.
um, the first couple of times I was just invited to Paris and Germany by friends that saw
Mhm.
me. And then when I slept on many floors and flew couch many times. And this is before the subway had elevators and handicap elevators and carrying those big metal crates up and
Oh,
downstairs.
Lord.
Yeah, I mean, it was, so I think I was lucky that I had friends that would bring me over, but I always made music and I tried to do it as much as possible. But I think if anything in the last 10 years that has really changed something for me, it was the Boiler Room that I did 3 years ago.
Okay.
That now has 7 million views,
I know. I
um,
seen it.
which is insane.
I was like, "Pff, are you kidding me?" The
Yeah.
first time I saw it, I went back to it and I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, but I
How did
think,
that feel?
well, it's a funny story about that thing. So talking about, I thought if I was on the cover of this magazine, that would get me there. I thought if
Yeah.
I DJ'd at this club, that would get me there. I thought if I had a record out on this label, that would get me there. Um, and I realized that you never know when your moment is going to come. I didn't know my moment was going to come that day. Had been in Australia for 2 weeks. I didn't have a really great tour. It was the last gig of my tour. the, I got off the plane. There was no one to pick me up. I literally only had 45 minutes before I had to get to the hotel and get to the stage. And the car literally dropped me off at I had 5 minutes to go to the bathroom at the hotel. And then, so I was dealing with all of this adrenaline of being angry. And then I get there and I was just thrust into it was so many people, but I could only see what was around me. And
Yeah.
I was just dealing with logistical stuff like, is the mix okay? Like, well, and then I just felt like everybody showed up that day. Ron showed up, Frankie showed up, Derek showed up, Danny showed up. Like everything that I love, because I had an hour
Mhm.
to tell a story.
Mhm.
And how could I tell this story in an hour? So I started off with R&B, Stevie Wonder. That's where this music comes from. And
Mhm.
then I went into Go Bang because that's New York, Arthur Russell. Then I went to, so it was like I was just putting all these narratives in my mind of everything that I was learned and taught and put that in that hour. And when I left, I just thought like, okay, well, it's done. I had no idea that 3 years later that people would still be talking about that. And I had no idea that that 1 hour would change people's perception of who I am as a DJ. Because for
Mhm.
me, I didn't even think I played that great. I've had much better sets for me, as far as, technically.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Well,
so
you're
you
not.
never know. You
I
never
love that
know.
story. Let me ask you a question about it. Did you go in with a set in mind, or did you
No,
feel it when you got there?
I put my set together on the plane.
Yeah.
I just chose a bunch of records that I thought would work.
Yeah. And you say, I'm gonna pick 10 of these.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
And you can't prepare for that.
No, I don't
There's
think
no
so.
way you can prepare. There's no way to prepare. There's no way. I
Right.
didn't know what I was walking into.
No.
All I knew was that I trusted myself enough.
Good.
And the whole thing that I just kept thinking about is like, please don't let me fuck up a mix because I do not need, because women get it harder technically than men do.
Yeah, of
When
course
men
they
fucks
do.
up, and oh, it's rock star. Oh. But if we do it, it's like we can't DJ. So the whole thing was is like I just wanted to make sure I didn't fuck up because you're
Yeah.
talking about being outside. The acoustics aren't that great. Speakers are on the floor. Like I'm having to
Yeah.
navigate a video in my face.
And people everywhere, they're
People
like,
are, so it's not like the most comfortable
no.
environment to do your work, but everyone showed up that day.
Yep, you got it right the first time.
Yeah. Well,
See,
no, there were millions of times before that first
what I
time.
mean is the time where it needed to count.
The time where it needed to count, a bitch had put in the hours.
See, you that's right. That's yeah, it's
I put in the
opportunity.
hours. But the hours started from when I heard my first salsa record when I was
Of course it did.
12. That's when the hours started.
That's right. I love it. Oh, what a great story. You got to
Mhm.
write a book, honey.
I know my mother keeps telling me to do that, but I'm still alive
Yeah.
yet. Let me like get through this first. Let me get through this one, and then let me get through life before I put it down on paper.
Write your memoirs.
Yeah.
Let's talk about touring a little bit, just a little bit, because I
Oh,
think
it's
it's.
horrible.
I just was going to ask you: do you love it? Do you hate it? What do you like
I
about it?
love DJing. I hate touring.
Okay.
One of the great things about the pandemic is that I was allowed to rest. I learned a new skill. I learned how to cook vegan food. Um, I got to really do something else. So when we talk about my fashion line, I got to be creative in another arena.
Mhm.
I always knew when I started to get this profile that not to put all my eggs on one basket. It's like, you know what, honey, like I've had a little bit of success before, but not like this. And I always know that it's like this. But
Mhm.
if I don't depend on this and do other things, then I can have a lot of balls going. So when that one
Yes.
slows down, this one picks up. When that one slows, so I'm able to still have presence in a creative way
Mhm.
and not just rely on making records for the club. And no
Mhm.
disrespect on anyone if that's what they do. But for me, I knew that I needed to have my portfolio needs to be diverse, honey. I've been down that
Mhm.
road before. I've been through when house music went out of fashion. I've been through when minimal was big, when electro was big, when this was big, and then house music was put to the back burner. Then the two new pretty young white children got thrust to the front.
Mhm.
So I always knew that I needed to have other things going on. So I was lucky enough to start this clothing brand with Comme des Garçons, and so the pandemic really allowed me to. Touring is hard.
Yeah.
You don't eat properly. You
Right.
don't rest properly. I actually have really tight. I love yoga, but I have really tight abductors from sitting on planes for hours and
Mhm.
hours and
Mhm.
hours. Um, you go to South American country, you're like, can I have something vegan? And they throw a piece of leaf lettuce on the plate. It's like, you go to these South American country where it's fried and
Yes.
cheese and
And lots of
bread and
cows.
yeah, and it's just like, oh my God, I don't eat like this, but
Yeah.
this is, you know, and not sleeping. Like people really underestimate lack of sleep.
Mhm. Mhm.
The stresses of having to perform under those things. It's not all glamorous.
Yeah.
The DJing is the easy part.
Yeah. We were having a conversation recently with Jihad Muhammad. He came on the show, and he was saying something very similar. It's like, once you're there and you're kind of in your space, it's okay, but the travel can be really grueling.
And getting to the deck sometimes, honey, if
Yeah.
you go, especially when you've flown somewhere all day. For people that don't do this, they feel like we're complaining. And I always say, if you haven't done it yourself, then you shouldn't judge what it's
That's
really
right.
like.
That's right. That's right.
Because yes, you see the name and lights and you see the
Mhm.
applause but you don't see you don't see the man behind the curtain.
Right.
And having to fly somewhere for 9 hours and then do a 3-hour car drive in the middle of somewhere and then have to go DJ and then have to go to sleep for 2 hours and then get back in the car to go to do the next gig.
Right.
It can be really rough. So
Yeah.
like I said, the DJing part is not the hard part. I get paid to tour, not DJ.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. That's hard. Well, I'm
Mhm.
glad you're still doing it. I think it's what the world needs, and I know it's a bit of a sacrifice, but we're all glad you're out there.
Hell, I'm just glad I got a job.
Well, this is helpful.
I live in gratitude, honey. If all I have to do is sit on an airplane, I mean,
You,
there are some discomforts, but I'm
you
just
know, you're very you are a black person from the South Side, because Black people from the South Side are like multiple streams of income.
yeah,
Like, let's keep it real. This is
yeah.
our government job.
This is a government job. Yeah, child. I got to keep shit moving, honey.
So
All
speaking of different lines of income, let's talk about fashion.
right,
Honey
okay.
fucking Dijon. I mean, I know you got so much going on, and it's hard to keep up. And I have bought pieces, so just so you know, I
All right.
patronize you. I send other people to your shop.
We support Black businesses.
You got to. You got to support my girl.
Yeah.
Do it now.
Thank
Do it
you.
today.
Thank you. Thank
But
you.
talk about your fashion line.
Well, like I said, growing up for me, the way I experienced fashion in house music culture, um, being inspiration instead of aspiration, I really started doing clothes because I felt like the community that I come from, how can I translate this culture in a way that wasn't old?
Mm-hmm.
How can I show people images of this stuff that wasn't old? Because to us, like we talked about Thing Magazine and we talked about all these things.
Yes.
That's like nothing to us. There's a whole world that, like, when I show people these magazines, like, what? Like, when we talked about Robert Ford and
Mm-hmm.
queer theory and all of this stuff, like, people, this is what I mean by it wasn't just about the music. So for me, it was a way to tell this story with clothing and also to express how people dressed back in the day, because
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't seeing it. And it just goes back to why I started DJing. I just wasn't seeing,
Right.
if I wasn't going to do it, who else could do it? There's no one else that could do it because
Right.
they just didn't have that experience.
Right.
So that's why I started that. And the whole Honey Fucking Dijon is just to celebrate. We call it style and culture remixed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of bringing my culture and my people, trans culture, Black gay culture,
Mm-hmm.
Black gay queer theory here. Look at this. This was also important. This is also art. This is also fashion. This is also beauty. That's the reason.
I love it. My wife, she always tells me, she's got a nickname for my future, whatever it is, not a clothing line, but whatever project. She's like, it's got to be Lori Branch bitches, and I'm like, what? It's Lori Branch bitches. I'm like, she is not that kind of girl, but for some reason she loves that tagline. I was like, okay, eventually we're gonna have it. It's Lori Branch bitches something. Okay.
Hey, it's so funny when I was the one that actually, when I was working with Country Girls, I was like, do you think we should just use HFD? And it's like, no, we love Honey Fucking Dijon. I was like,
Yeah.
so it was actually them that wanted to go with that.
That's
And I'm surprised there's been no pushback anywhere. Well, I guess if you can have Wet Ass Pussy as the anthem.
Oh my God, really?
If
That is the perfect segue to your music. Wet Ass Pussy. Okay. I don't know how we're going to get censored with this, but got to talk about it. But you're not doing Wet Ass Pussy songs. Excuse me.
I'm not doing WAP. No.
You're not doing the WAP. You're doing many other things. You've worked with so many artists, from Lady Gaga to Madonna to many of the women who I love. You're doing a lot. You are doing a lot.
Hopefully.
girl, you are doing a lot.
I'm trying to do the most. It's not over yet,
You,
honey. There's
you're
more to
doing,
come. I'm doing,
clearly you're just beginning.
yeah.
But what, where do you see yourself? I mean, is it all equal? I mean, equal parts DJ, fashion, music. What role does that play in your life? And